All right, just waiting a couple of seconds so that everybody can come in. Well then, hello everyone. I am glad that you're all here with us today. And for those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Susanne. I am the co-founder and CEO of Citruslabs. And Citruslabs is the fastest growing provider of clinical trials for brands. So in case you're interested in conducting clinical trials or perception studies for your brand, feel free to contact us at hello@citruslabs.com. And today is a very special webinar because we have not just one lawyer here, but actually two of them. And I am really excited to welcome Heather Bustos, the owner and partner at Bustos Law Group, and Kerry Tassopoulos of counsel at Platt Richmond. And before we go and hear from Heather and Kerry, I wanted to quickly remind you that what we are covering today, it's all about the FDA and the FTC regulations and guidelines for supplements, for cosmetics. We'll talk about product claims. We talk about guidance, how to create them, what to do and what not to do in terms of influencer marketing. And we also talk about the consequences of non-compliance with FDA and FTC guidelines. There will be some time for Q&A at the end of this webinar, and please put all of your questions into the Q&A box or in the chat. Heather, Kerry, I am happy that you're here with us today. And before we talk more about FTC and FDA regulations, could you quickly introduce yourselves and just tell us who you are, what you do, and ladies first. So let's start with Heather.
Thank you, Susanne, so much for having me. Just so you guys know, I have a little bit of a throat thing that came up this morning, so forgive me on my voice. So I'm Heather Bustos. I'm the managing partner at Bustos Law Group. Our goal is we are compliance counsel for brands on a mission. So we help companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, medical device spaces with FDA compliance. We help everyone from importers to distributors, manufacturers, all the way across the board. And some of the services we provide are things like manufacturing compliance. We do compliance for brand owners, label reviews, registrations, even stuff on the import side. So we kind of do a little bit of everything.
Awesome. Well, Kerry, it's your turn now.
Great. Thank you, Susanne. Thank you for the opportunity to be on the webinar. And Heather, thank you for partnering with me on this. I think it'll be interesting for everyone. I am an attorney in Dallas, Texas, that has significant in-house experience through my 25-year career at a large multinational manufacturer and distributor of cosmetics products. I know oftentimes people go to LinkedIn and looked at backgrounds. And so in my role at that company, I was responsible for all of the regulatory matters affecting our products and the marketing of our products. Now I'm in private practice in Dallas with the law firm of Platt Richmond. We're a full service law firm, and I'm able to bring my in-house experience to the other lawyers and to our clients and help them with the specific areas around consumer packaged goods, claims, but also other aspects of their business. So thanks for the opportunity to be on this webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both. And I think that before we go into the fireside chat part of this webinar, it would be great to hear from you about these regulations and guidelines that are now popping up more and more from the FDA and FTC. And could Heather or Kerry, could you give us like a quick overview of the FDA and what we have to keep in mind with them?
Sure. So the FDA, that would be my specialty. I know Kerry will go over the FTC part. So FDA regulates majority of the consumer packaged goods that are on the market. So it's everything from, as you can see on the screen, biologics, devices, tobacco, food, supplements, cosmetics, everything, you know, within those bounds. An interesting fact that I learned like really early in my career is that the FDA regulates about 20 cents of every dollar spent by US consumers. So it's a massive amount. And they're responsible for the oversight of more than 2.5 trillion in consumption of products. So they have a very large hand in regulating US products. FDA regulated products account for 12% of US imports and 16% of US exports. So it's very massive, their jurisdiction. And so I'm excited to talk a little bit more in detail about what they do and kind of help you guys navigate the FDA regulations.
And let me add just a couple of points, if I might, Suzanne.
Of course, go ahead.
One is that I think consumers typically don't think about the FDA until there's some type of issue with a product, a recall, a news report around product safety, whether it's toothpaste that's imported from China or whether it's food safety. But the reality is, as a brand, I would say that you need to be aware of what is happening in Washington, but also at the state level with laws and regulations that impact ingredients, packaging, and product claims. So we typically focus on the FDA, but many states like California or Massachusetts or Oregon are also active in their regulatory oversight of products.
Very much so. I agree.
That is very interesting. So I have to keep in mind the FDA, but also then the state level as well.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Great. And Kerry, could you also give us a quick overview of the FTC?
Right. The Federal Trade Commission is the U.S. Government agency that is responsible for enforcing the laws pertaining to advertising and product claims. Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act is the authorization area that gives the Federal Trade Commission very broad oversight of what brands and what sellers of products and services can say. And I think oftentimes, especially in FDA regulated areas, there's a tremendous amount of focus, and it should be, on what the FDA is doing in terms of regulation, enforcement actions. But the Federal Trade Commission, especially now with so many products being sold through e-commerce, is, I would say, as equally important in terms of compliance. And the other thing that I'll say, and I think this is a theme that we'll discuss during the course of the webinar, is think about the work that Citruslabs does and the work that we and other lawyers do as insurance. The one thing that I found in my career that is critical in the sale of these products is the reputation of your product and the reputation of your brand. And so understanding that each product and each case is different, there's not a one size fits all FTC approach. It's not a check the box. It's, let's look at what we want to say. Let's look at what our product does. And then let's look and see what the Federal Trade Commission might be doing from an enforcement action. So I think each case stands on its own.
I like that. It's all about risk, right? And what risk are you willing to take?
Suzanne, great observation. It truly is. I like to describe it, and have done this for many years, as a risk continuum. And so if you think about 100%, what the lawyers would want oftentimes is 100% zero risk. There will not be any lawsuit or any regulatory action. And oftentimes the brand owners are willing to accept well, let's flip it the other way, 0% risk, 100% risk, especially when they look at competitors' products in the marketplace and say, well, how is it that they can get away with saying X, Y, Z, that
Yeah.
I'm at a competitive disadvantage? And so, yeah, it is all about risk and reward. But that's why you're in business.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So now that we know what FTC, FDA are all about, and thanks for the brief introduction, I want to move a little bit to the big topic of complaints. You both are very experienced attorneys, and you have seen a lot. And from your experience, what are the most common compliance mistakes brands are making when they want to market their cosmetic or their supplement?
So you want me to start first or Kerry?
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay. So I would say when it comes to marketing, so the main thing is looking at claims, what you're trying to claim. So I'll come from the FDA side and then let Kerry talk about the FTC. So the first one that I think is really important is understanding the actual definition of labeling, that FDA doesn't just consider it your external packaging. It's also considered to be any marketing that you're doing, to promote the product. So it can be websites, it can be social media, it can even be third parties that you're in contract with. And this is something that, the FDA and the FTC will bring forth. Also making claims outside of the category or classification. So for example, if you're a supplement brand, the types of claims you can make are something called structure function claims, where you can talk about how the product or the ingredients affect the structure or function of the body. But if you're in the cosmetic category, you're not able to make those types of claims. And so you want to make sure that you're understanding the category under which you fall, what types of claims are allowed. And the one that gets people the most in trouble are what are called drug claims, which are claims that treat or prevent, mitigate a disease or condition. And going off on that topic, a lot of brands also don't really fully understand that there are things called implied claims. So the FDA is not dumb. They understand that brands may not specifically come right out and make a very express claim, but they'll try to find ways to make implied claims, and those are also regulated by the FDA. So those, I would say, are the top things that I see from a marketing perspective that brands really need to be aware of.
Yeah,
Great.
let me add to that. If I am a brand owner and I'm selling a product, the one thing that I would want to keep in mind is I am building the story. This is a brand story, okay? And the brand story is told by my labeling. It's told by any advertising that I do. Advertising could be something as simple as my website, what I say on my website. It could be the use of a third-party influencer. But the two elements that I think a brand owner should at least be thinking about are, how do I substantiate what I am saying about my product? And how transparent am I going to be about the ingredients, the efficacy, how effective the product is, understanding that there is this environment out there that the regulators, when I say the regulators, I mean federal regulators and state regulators, their mission is not to stop the sale of product. Their mission is safety of the product for the consumer and clarity and transparency about what the product will or will not do. And so I think my perspective has always been, let me help the brand owner, the marketer, the research and development team, the regulatory team, the sales team. Let's look for that safe harbor. And if we find that safe harbor and there are gray areas, then this product or this category of product should fall into the compliant area. And so understanding from essentially a high level and then taking it down to the very specifics of, can we make this particular statement about this product on our website, and then having a risk assessment, as we discussed earlier, of what would the normal average consumer take away from the words or the video or what is being shared with them about this product. And that's the standard that, in my experience, the FTC will focus on. It's the average consumer.
Yep. That is absolutely right. And I like that you also mentioned the word transparency, because I think this is one keyword that gets a lot of brands in trouble as well. Just, not really transparent about, claims, claim substantiation and all of that.
Well, this is I would refer all your viewers or participants in the webinar to the Citruslabs website. I mentioned to you previously that I thought the way that the articles address some of these topics is very helpful. The other thing that I will note is that there are these ebbs and flows that I've seen in my career. There will be a focus on, let's make natural claims. Let's claim that our product is natural. And then there's a lot of discussion around, what is natural? What does that mean? And I would posit that business is always a step or two or three ahead of the regulators. And so business is out there pushing the edge of the envelope. And one way to avoid regulatory action, which I know we're going to talk about later, is to look at what the environment and what the rules of the road are right now, and then think about, if we say X, Y, and Z, and we can substantiate it, and we are transparent, we are less likely to have regulatory action. So it's really, I think, both for the FDA and the FTC, it's a proactive approach. Let's be proactive. Let's think about the what ifs.
Yeah, 100%. And just some housekeeping. So I'm seeing some raised hands. If you have some questions, please put them in the Q&A field of Zoom or in the chat, and then we'll answer them later. Okay. So, next question. When I look at, all of these guidelines, and last December, we have seen MOCRA and we have seen the FTC guidelines. I don't think that there was a lot of movement before that. I think MOCRA was the first big thing since, was it the 1930s, I think? Right. And now we are also seeing, a citizen petition for the FTC guidelines, because now, brands feel that FTC basically puts drug standards on supplements without supplements being able to make drug claims, and brand owners are mad, and rightfully so, right? But, obviously this whole area is really evolving. It's a really evolving arena of guidelines and regulations. And what is your take on how brands can actually stay updated over time to actually meet these new regulations and meet also these nuances?
Heather, do you mind if I go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Sure, go.
So it's interesting, because MOCRA was going to be the cure-all for every challenge that a cosmetics brand was going to face. And in my career, I've had the opportunity to be in Washington, to meet with members of Congress, to meet with the FDA about some of the industry-supported changes to cosmetics regulations. And so I definitely have some thoughts and opinions about that. I think if I'm a brand owner, whether I'm an established brand owner or I'm a new, or I'm just starting out, my advice would be that you use MOCRA and all of the other information that is available on the FDA and FTC websites and through other resources, whether it's trade associations, whether it's companies like Citruslabs that has a lot of public information, whether it's material that's been put out there by lawyers and consultants, and you try and get a better understanding of this environment where you are selling your product, number one. Number two, accept the reality that MOCRA did not and does not solve and respond to every single challenge that what I will call the activist community is going to raise. So there still are going to be states that are going to have some ability to establish laws regarding the product ingredient use, product labeling, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, I'm sure you got some comments as well.
I mean, no, and I agree with you, Kerry. I think, you know, my practical advice was email lists, which I think you kind of touched on. The FDA has some really great email lists you can sign up for on their website, and they provide updates on a consistent basis. Maybe even too many updates, if I'm honest. I feel like I get an email from them every day, at least 3 or 4. But that's because I'm signed up for all the different product categories. So that's a really good resource. You know, when it comes to the way that the law moves, I think, you know, Susanne touched on this point. The law tends to move pretty slowly in general. And so, like, we have standards on the FDA side from the 1920s that are still, you know, in force. But in certain cases, what happens, just like with MOCRA, where there's these large changes in the law that happen relatively quickly. And, you know, in this case, it kind of came, if you're familiar with the history of it, there has been an effort to modify the regulations for cosmetics for a very long time. This has been something that has gone through Congress in different forms. And, you know, we didn't necessarily think it would go through at this time, and it did. And now we're all having to kind of catch up. So, yeah, I do think, going back to the point, to the initial question, it's very important to stay up to date with it. You can get it from the regulations directly, or signing up for email lists where you have consultants, lawyers commenting on what those regulations actually mean and how they're put into practice from a practical sense. Because a regulation can tell you something and it's very vague. They tend to be very vague, but you want to get advice from people that are experts in taking that regulation, breaking it down, and helping you understand from a practical perspective how it's going to apply to you. So I think that's really important as well.
And the other thing that I want to emphasize for the viewers, for the people that are asking the questions, is a particular brand, a particular product, a particular FDA regulated category, the review of the claims should be, in my experience, fact specific and context specific. Okay, so making a blanket statement that any claim in a particular FDA regulated area that includes this information or doesn't make this kind of statement is a safe claim, I think is foolhardy. Now, I'm not saying that just because Heather and I are on this call and we do this for a living, but I think is, again, you're a brand, you're going to try and maximize the dollars that you have to spend before you take your product to market. Will you, by saving money now, end up with a cost later, either in terms of a warning letter that comes from a regulator, a competitor's claim, a lawsuit, a reputational issue? All you need, unfortunately, to have a negative impact on your product is to have a couple of customers go online, go into social media and say, Kerry's cream said that it would do X, Y, and Z. I bought it. I used it. It doesn't do that. Wow, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And we are now already at the subject of claims, and I would like to move this conversation more towards claims. And I know that the FTC says that brands need competent and reliable scientific evidence. And I know that they are mentioning randomized controlled trials as the gold standard, and give that as an example of competent and reliable scientific evidence. Now, as an epidemiologist, I know that there are many other study designs outside of, the RCT, the randomized controlled trial, that are also accepted by the scientific community. And even single group studies are accepted. And one thing that I often feel, these agencies and sometimes also, attorneys and consultants forgetting is that brands are working also with a budget. And what is your take, around, key elements that make a product claim compliant with these regulations?
Go ahead, Heather.
I mean, I was gonna say when it comes to on the first point, so talking about, when you're kind of strapped with your budget and you're not able to afford the level of substantiation required for the type of claim made, then you're gonna have to be selective with the claims you're making, and you're gonna have to be strategic. And I think that's with the new guidance that the FTC came out with, I think that that's what they're trying to get at. They don't want brands just making all over claims that they don't have the substantiation for. They want brands to be a little more thoughtful about the types of claims they're making to make sure that they have the adequate substantiation. And so, you may have to water down the claims a little bit. I've had clients that, initially they made more watered down claims, built up some capital, and then they were able to afford the bigger studies to make the larger claims. But obviously it comes down to, the market you're in, how competitive it is, what your competitors are doing. There are cases where, I do have clients come to me very often, and I think we kind of touched on this earlier, where they say, well, that brand is doing it, why can't I? And the way that I compare it is, there might be a stop sign, right? And if a cop is not there to catch you, then you can maybe run through that stop sign a couple times. So that's kind of the same way that regulation works. The FDA or the FTC may not be there when you run that stop sign the first time, but there's always that chance. So, that's just the amount of risk that you're willing to take on, and those other competitors are willing to take on ultimately. And so that's where that conversation of strategy with claims comes in.
Yeah, and I would add, and let's go back to your point, Susanne, about budget.
Yeah.
Look, I've never been a brand owner. I've never taken a product personally to market. I've never had to put my skin in the game, but I've been at the table as we've evaluated, what does this product really do? What are the ingredients in the product? What does the marketplace look like? Now instead of saying what we can't say, let's turn it around and say, what can we say? How do we broaden the message? And I think the other actually benefit that exists is, how can I use different channels of advertising or different platforms of advertising to continue to educate the consumer or inform the consumer or notify the consumer that, hey, we have a product and we want you to try it. I mean, yes, the FTC has put out this year, additional guidelines related to the use of influencers and social media. I would recommend that any brand owner actually spend the time to read through that document and then creatively think about, okay, there is the absolute prohibition. Now, what's not prohibited? How can I be creative and understand that there is some risk, especially with a new brand, but as we grow, as the brand grows and develops and has more sales, then it might be that different claims can be made, different tests can be run. But at the end of the day, you don't want to lose your place in the market because you've either had, and I know it sounds like a broken record, a warning letter, a lawsuit, or any other regulatory action. That's the price of admission in this area.
Yeah. I think too, going back to how to build a compliant claim, I can't tell you there's a perfect formula, but I can tell you there are some things to think about, which the first thing I always go to is you need to know what category you fall under and what types of claims are allowed under that category. I touched on in the beginning. For a cosmetic, for example, you cannot make any claims about the structure or function of the body. So you're not allowed to make claims, essentially anything that's deeper than skin level, you're not supposed to make claims about. So from the beginning, if you understand that that's your barrier right there, that is the line that is drawn, then you need to determine within that area, like Kerry said, getting creative with what are some ways we can say this without crossing that line. And then, the final thing to think about is substantiating those claims. Once you've gathered the types of claims you want to make, that they're compliant. I usually split it between FDA, FTC. I think you think about the FDA side first of what's the category, how does it fit, is this an allowable claim, and then you seek to substantiate it. You can kind of do it at the same time. I think there are ways to kind of build both in while you're thinking about it, but you have to start at square one with what's your category, am I allowed to say this or not. There's a really cool case study that I've shared on a couple other webinars here, which is the brand Zarbee's. Really came out, if you're familiar with them, they are basically make honey-based products. They're marketed towards children, and the idea is they help with cough and cold, right? And so FDA came out and said you can't make those and be a supplement, you would be considered a drug. And so what Zarbee's team did, which I thought was ingenious, and I've actually used this same strategy with other clients once I learned of it, is they essentially said there are reasons to have sore throat that are not necessarily related to a disease or condition. So you can say, you have hoarseness, like you lost your voice, things like that, where it's not necessarily related to a disease or condition. Obviously, people in the market are buying this for their kids when they have a cold and they have a cough, but Zarbee's is not marketing it that way. And so ultimately they played it really smart in limiting the amount of risk to themselves while still being able to sell the product for these uses. So that's kind of that get creative idea where you're coming up with different ways to kind of navigate that line that's drawn within the product category.
Let me add one element, and I think this may address a couple of the questions that have come in. How would a non-lawyer, a non-regulatory affairs person even know where to go and where to start on understanding this? Go to the Federal Trade Commission website and do a simple search for social media, influencers, advertising. There are 3 or 4 Federal Trade Commission published articles and guidelines that are on their website that are easy to understand. And I would recommend that anyone who is curious about or involved with creating product claims, or that, especially if they're using a third-party manufacturer and they want to confirm what they have been advised, that they go to the FTC website and use that resource as a starting place.
And I would add, don't just try to follow what you see in the market. That just because someone is on the market does not make them compliant. And so that is definitely something I would not do, is go and try to follow what other brands are doing, because it's impossible to know how compliant they are and what their mindset is on compliance. it's better to, like Kerry said, I think the FDA website for me is a little less easy to navigate than the
I agree.
FTC.
Yes.
I would probably start with, if you're looking at the categories, go to the definitions in the regulation, and start with the definition of the product category. So whether it be cosmetic, supplement, food, device, whichever area, and that's a good starting point.
And actually, you know, the other thing would be, you know, contact Heather or me and say, look, I want to do X. You know, help me understand the risk. And then that gives us the opportunity to educate that client, that brand owner, about, you know, what the risk is. Now let's think about ways that we, to your, Heather, to your example, we can come up with, you know, creative, compliant approaches to help the brand be competitive in the marketplace. Look, the bottom line is, everyone who's on this call presumably wants to sell a product and generate revenue and grow their business. So my job, Heather's job, Suzanne's job is not to keep you from doing that. It's to help you do that.
Correct.
And I would love to actually get also, you know, talk a little bit about what happens when brands actually not compliant. So let's say a brand doesn't care, doesn't have the correct substantiation for a claim, and what are the potential consequences of non-compliance with these FDA and FTC guidelines?
I think Kerry gave some good previews as to some
Well, look, let's talk specifically about where the challenges may come, right?
Yeah.
I have a brand, I'm selling my product. One, I want to continue to grow. That means I have to make sure that my brand, my product is seen by customers as having value. So I would say that brand reputation is paramount. Even before, am I going to get a warning letter from a federal regulator about a claim that I've made, and even before, I may be concerned about a plaintiff's lawyer filing a lawsuit, because with the impact, the instantaneous impact of a negative review or negative reviews in social media, that can destroy a brand. I'm going to use an example, and it's to me, it's a fascinating study in the power of how quickly social media can change. I mean, think about what happened to Bud Light this year, okay? And I'm not talking about, you know, right or wrong. I'm just saying, here is the largest, you know, beer brand in the United States. AmBev is one of the largest, if not the largest, alcoholic beverage distributor in the world. Their stock price was hammered, and a lot of it was because of social media, right? So the ability for me to post a negative comment, especially if I am an influencer, can destroy everything that the brand owner has done, and can destroy a compliant product. Heather, you may want to talk more about when the FDA sends a warning letter, or if you as a brand receive a demand letter from a lawyer saying, hey, my client was injured, because those are other consequences.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I mean, from a regulatory perspective, like you said, there's things like warning letters. You know, I kind of wanted to touch on, and at least that's what my law firm wants to focus on, and what we try to focus on, our clients who are, because there's a level of compliant, and then there's a level of you're actually trying to do better for consumers, and you're trying to bring up, you know, and the thing is, with compliance, the customers follow, right? Because they know that you have a good brand that's actually trying to do right for your consumers. So I think that that has to be the mindset. I never want to come from a place of fear of like, you know, what are the consequences we're trying to avoid. It's actually trying to be compliant, and maybe compliant plus would be the goal, at least if I was a brand owner in the current area, that in the current time frame that we're living in, because we're seeing, like Kerry was touching on, we're seeing not only regulatory actions, which have always been there, warning letters have always been there, which essentially, if you're not familiar with it, when you're issued a warning letter, it goes public. So it goes on FDA's website. Sometimes media picks it up. So it does go public. You have only 15 business days to respond to the warning letter with a concrete plan of how you're going to, you know, become compliant based on what they're stating. You know, aside from warning letters, there's also 483s, which are observations. Those do not go public per se. I think they can be accessed by FOIA requests, which are Freedom of Information Act requests, but that's where FDA comes out and inspects a facility. Actually, now they're doing paper inspections for brand owners. So if currently you're in a situation, which this is becoming much more the norm, where you own the brand, but you push out all the other things to other companies. So for example, contract manufacturer, a third-party logistics company. First of all, if you're not aware, you are responsible for the compliance of that product, of any of the products that are under your brand. But FDA, like I said, is now doing these paper inspections. I had a client recently where FDA said, you know, let's meet at your facility. They had no facility. They met at the kitchen table, at their home, because FDA can still come in, request all the documents to demonstrate compliance. So your job as a brand owner is oversight over the contract manufacturer, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. You do have to have a level of knowledge and expertise on compliance, and you know, in the case of cosmetics and food and supplements, good manufacturing practices as a brand owner. In addition, what Kerry touched on are these plaintiffs' lawsuits. And actually, I just wrote an article for Bloomberg Law on this, which it's all about the clean beauty movement, right? And what's going on with clean beauty, and how, you know, companies like Target and Sephora are getting into trouble for the claims, and they're getting lawsuits. And the issue with these lawsuits is they're so easy for plaintiffs' attorneys to bring, because these terms like natural, clean, they don't have set definitions. So agents are not defining them. So it's opening up the gates for these plaintiffs' attorneys to come in and say, well, you know, according to a consumer, they would expect that clean means XYZ. And so it's going to the courts. And ultimately, whether you win or lose the lawsuit, you're facing a lawsuit. It becomes public. You're having to put all the money into it. And so even brands that I know, even clients that I know have top of the line compliance are getting these suits. I don't think anyone is necessarily immune, but there are ways to kind of mitigate the risk, if you will. So I think that those are some of the major consequences that I'm seeing in these industries at the moment. And it is somewhat of a difficult time. It's dicey right now, for sure.
And one additional point, I think this might address, or might at least be responsive to some of the questions. I think different FDA regulated categories have different consequences, or different potential consequences.
Yeah.
The supplement area is an area that has traditionally been one where the FDA is not crystal clear, in my opinion, in what type of claims and what type of substantiation is needed. And there's a lot of history in Congress about that. Okay. So if what I have learned in my career is that business people want certainty. Tell me what the rules are.
Yeah.
And as long as I know what the rules are, then I can make decisions based on that. And I would say that, one, in some areas like the supplement area, homeopathic product area, there is less certainty, number one. Number two, scientific advances that are outside of the traditional FDA regulated products area are being brought into the FDA regulated product area. So you have nanotechnology that was in the defense industry that's being used in the cosmetics industry. That may be a crazy example that doesn't exist. But then the question is, the regulators aren't caught up with that. And so then again, we get to risk versus reward. So I think, the bottom line for me, if I'm counseling a client, is what is your product? What regulated area within subset within the FDA? How are you going to market and advertise your product? What channels are you going to use? Let's take a holistic approach and let's evaluate, and this doesn't take an inordinate amount of time. Let's evaluate what's happening in the marketplace, and then let's sell product.
Yeah.
Let's sell product.
I think one other thing we have to touch on when it comes to consequences are these watchdog agencies, or I wouldn't call them, they're watchdog companies. So there's one example, which I know Kerry's familiar with, the NAD, which is actually a branch of the Better Business Bureau.
Right.
And what they do is essentially, they're a watchdog company for the FTC. And they will actually, it's actually pretty formal, I would say.
It is a very formal process. Right.
They'll send, a letter stating that, in that case, they focus on substantiation and the levels of substantiation. I've seen, I have clients where there's arguments about, how the actual trials are run, what participants were part of the trials, the types of claims being made. So when you say clinically proven versus clinically tested, things like that. And so what that company does is they bring you through this formal procedure, and the consequences of that are they go public with their opinion. And if they feel that you're not doing what you should be doing, like, trying to fall in line with what they're trying to get you to do, then what they do is they take all the stuff they've found and they send it to the FTC and they say, here you go. You don't have to do any of the work. We've done all the work for you. Now you can bring something against this company. So it does have very real consequences. I would not take any of these watchdog companies lightly. But it's the difficulty is it's not a federal agency that you're dealing with. You're dealing with a company that, the rules may be a little different. The way that they operate may be a little different. So just all of this to say, I definitely didn't want to leave that out of the conversation, because that's something that we've also seen a lot of, more recently, even against larger companies.
Right. Yeah. The National Advertising Division of the BBB, in my experience, actually provides a very worthwhile service to help level the competitive playing field. When you mentioned watchdogs, I was thinking about the activist community where, let's use, I won't even name any, but basically they're out there saying these types of ingredients are unsafe. So they may look at the Prop 65 ingredient list in California and decide to start a campaign to take that list of prohibited ingredients to other states. And then all of a sudden you're looking at, well, I can sell in Iowa, but I can't sell in Massachusetts and California and Florida. Okay, how do I formulate a state specific or a region specific product? And we're getting kind of into the details here, but those are some of the consequences that a business owner has to evaluate.
That's right. Yeah. And definitely, NAD, everybody should take that very seriously. Kerry, I did not know that, they are these groups that can actually force you to change your formulation in one state, but you can still use it in the other one.
No, they can't force you, but if I let's say that I don't want lead in lipstick, right?
Yeah.
And I'm an activist that doesn't want lead in lipstick. I'm going to generate my scientific studies. I'm going to build a PR campaign. I'm going to go to legislators. We've seen this. This has happened in the cosmetics industry over the last 25 years. and we'll go to Congress and we'll say, these ingredients are unsafe. And then the effort will be to pass a law that says cosmetics brands are not allowed to use lead in lipsticks. Well, if you get a federal law, you've got federal preemption. If the federal law doesn't preempt completely, and MOCRA, in my opinion, does not, then you can have states that can pass laws. And we're talking, this is a very general conversation and comment. You can have states that can pass laws like Prop 65 in California. And companies, in fact, companies that I've worked for have had to say, will we sell our products with those ingredients in other states, but not sell in California, or will we stop selling those products?
Right.
Hopefully nobody on this call will ever have to deal with that or face that.
Yeah, I hope so too. It sounds very complex.
It is.
Okay. So we have about 7 minutes left. I think we did talk a little bit already about influencers. And Kerry, could you just mention the document that you mentioned earlier, where they can find it about, you know, what brand owners should read on influencers and online marketing?
Yeah. So on the Federal Trade Commission website, which is www.ftc.gov, there are 2 or 3 documents, maybe more than that. One is Disclosures 101 for social media influencers. Another one is endorsements, influencers, and reviews. There was in 2023 a new endorsement guide that is out there that the FTC put out there. It's called FTC Guidelines for Influencers. So, you know, we can provide to you, Susanne, those. I don't have them in front of me to pop into the chat, but you know, we can provide those. But again, very simple. Go to the FTC website and say influencer guidelines, search for influencer guidelines, and those will be pulled up.
Perfect. Yeah, we can provide those in the follow-up to this webinar. And I think now it would be also great, you know, to answer some questions. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A option or in the chat. And I can see that we already have a bunch of questions. We won't get through all of them, but we try to answer a couple. One thing that I'm also seeing a lot that brands are doing is some brands have quizzes. Basically, you know, before we can buy a product, there's a quiz. And then these quizzes sometimes also ask for, you know, underlying health conditions, underlying issues. Is that allowed in terms of, you know, the guidelines that we are hearing about?
I've reviewed a few of those too. I would say, yeah, it can be considered a form of marketing. It goes back to the definition of labeling and what's considered under FDA jurisdiction. I've reviewed a couple of those, and you know, I think to Kerry's point earlier, as an attorney, I'm trying to make it as low risk as possible. I understand, you know, because some of those questions may be, you know, have you suffered from gastrointestinal issues or things like that, where they're trying to understand what your health status is in order to sell the product. And the problem with that is it can be considered an implied claim in some circumstances where you're implying it based on the way the quiz goes. So if you're saying at the very end, oh, you should buy, you know, this product, and the question was, do you have gastrointestinal issues? Yes. Depending on how the product is marketed, it may be considered an implied claim. So I think you have to tread carefully, because there are cases where, for example, you can claim maintains overall gastrointestinal health. That is a very safe you know, supplement claim, structure function claim. So if that's the only claim you're making, you can kind of see where the risk level may be lower. But if you're asking all these questions about diseases or conditions and then recommending the product to help with those diseases or conditions, that would be considered an implied claim. So I would definitely tread carefully with those types of quizzes.
Yeah,
Kerry,
comment? Just, you know, I think the other observation is the verb you use is important. Maintains, supports, promotes, enhances. Those are all, they all have, words have meanings, and words, and so deciding which word, which verb you want to use is going to have an impact on risk.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, living in the dictionary is really important when it comes to creating claims. There's a lot of times where, you know, clients send me stuff and I'm just looking up the actual definition of the word, because you really do need to understand what the meaning is. And going back to Kerry's point earlier, the FDA looks at what would a lay person interpret that word to mean and interpret the statement to mean. And so that's kind of the lens through which you want to look at claims as you're making them.
And Kerry, you already mentioned a couple of these phrases and words like support and promote.
Right.
One person asks, what are your thoughts on brands making claims using wordings like support and promote?
So I'm gonna back up and say, show me the data, show me the science, show me the studies, and then we can have a conversation about whether promote or support is appropriate. And the other piece of this is looking at what the history, what the warning letters, what the pronouncements from the agencies have focused on. You know, so we're not reinventing the wheel here. A brand needs to be smart. A brand owner needs to be smart and rely on what already exists out there. And if they say, well, you know what, I want to say, because I believe that this product does support or promote, and here's the study that we've done, then the question is going to be, okay, did the study meet the established criteria, and can it be defended either before the regulator, in a court of law, or in the National Advertising NAD situation? I want to make one clarification, if I might, before we end, around my comment regarding MOCRA preemption. There is no, as I understand it, preemption in MOCRA that would prevent a state from banning the use of a particular ingredient. There are other aspects of MOCRA that do support federal preemption. But at the end of the day, there is not, from my perspective, full federal preemption, which is something that, at least in my experience, would have been preferable.
All right. And I, unfortunately, you know, it is already 11 a.m., past 11 a.m. Pacific time. So, you know, Heather and Kerry, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for helping us to understand the FDA and FTC guidelines, the nuances, and what brand owners have to keep in mind for their marketing and their claims. And on a personal level, I learned a lot from you today. And thank you very much, everyone, for tuning into our webinar today. I hope it was also very helpful for you guys. And if you are thinking about conducting your own clinical study, please reach out to us. We're happy to talk. Just send an email to hello@citruslabs.com. That's hello@citruslabs.com, or visit our website at citruslabs.com and fill out our contact us form, and a member of our team will be in touch ASAP. Please also get in touch with Heather and Kerry. How can they reach out to you guys?
For me, it would be by email, info@bustoslawgroup.com, or by phone, the number there, 832-592-7851.
Right, and I would just refer everyone to the Platt Richmond website, which has my contact information. So thank you for the opportunity, Suzanne.
Awesome. Great. Well, our next webinar will actually be on December 5th on Tuesday with Alice Chung of My Pocket CFO, and we are talking about cash flow management for health and wellness brands, so an entirely different topic. And if you're not registered yet, you can just scan the QR code, and it will be super informative how to preserve cash, especially when VC funding dried up like it is right now. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and please stay compliant with FDA and FTC guidelines. And I see you all next Tuesday. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.